Hi guys, so today let's talk about pops a little bit because I feel like this overlooked. They are deceptively simple but so often used in VFX productions for secondary effects that it's really important to be able to control them, and it's not always that straightforward. What you get in the start with something like quite uniform, and we will check out ways that we can diversify their speed, like what this guy would be doing, and control their bounciness, quieting them down after a while, all in a very controllable way. Also controlling the direction that they bounce after they hit, stuff like that. So let's start fresh, and I'm just going to be using that setup to reference and plan as I go. So the setups, the all pop setups are starting with solver, which is integrating the particles, positions, and so on. A source, basically the solver makes things move. A source, which is emitting the points into a pop object, which is holding output at the end, and I have prepared an emitter, which is just a simple line doing things, and I won't need too many here. Okay. Obviously, they do need some gravity, so I'm gonna use a pop force for this. I like that one because it has the group and it has some noise that I can put in. I will need the ground plane to merge with the object, so I can have the collisions with the ground. So we do have something. Now for the initial velocity, sometimes you do this in SOP. You would place points on some geometry and use its normals and some noise and stuff like that. But to just keep all of this stuff in pops and to kind of get into some interesting concepts, I'm gonna be doing this in pops also. So let's check out the pop velocity, which is nice for some initial velocity, and it has direction and scale, which is really important because it is giving us a glimpse into what velocity is, and velocity is a vector, like an arrow in space, just like what these guys have on them. But besides having the two components of, let me see here, the two components of just x and y, the coordinates of the point that defines the vector. Basically, the vector is defined between 0 and some point. So that point has an x and the y coordinates. So if we look at this point and we have straight angles going down to the x and y axis, and we measure here, so here we would measure 1, and here we would measure 0.5. So that's basically the point in here, and the line between the 0 and this point, this arrow, is the vector. So the vector has the x and y coordinates, but it also can be broken up into a direction and length. So in the velocity case, direction is direction, and the length is the speed of the velocity. So if you imagine that this whole thing is a circle, which I'm sorry I have not drawn perfectly well, and you imagine just putting one hand of the not sure how it was called, the tool that you used to have in school. It had the two arms, and it has a pencil in one tip and the pin on the other tip. So if you pin in the pin on 0 and just rotate around to make a circle, and you rotate this guy downwards until it crosses with the X, so you would get the length, and you can see length is a float, so it's just a single number. The other component is just 0, so you can express the single number. So this would be like this long, 1.2. And velocity does have both the scale and the velocity and the direction. Now, the reason this people call scale is because you can just multiply something, and scale and multiply is often used interchangeably. But first, let's check out the other thing that's happening, and that is that stuff is not falling down like you would expect, and that's because this pop velocity just happens all the time. So what I can do to fix that is to make a group that holds all the just born particles and call it born, and make the velocity only affect that group. Okay, so now velocity is only applied in the start, and then gravity takes over, which is cool. Now we want to do some variations here. We don't really like these lines that, you know, all of the particles here in the same line because they have the same speed and all pointing in the same direction, stuff like that. So let's see what we can do about that speed. I'm gonna bring in a pop. So here we have the velocity input, velocity output. That's great. You can just connect these, nothing happens. Now, as we were speaking before, the velocity has two components. One of them is speed, and the other one is direction. So to get these guys from the vector, we have two nodes or vex operations, if you're going to be writing this in a angle. And one of them is called the length, and this is giving us the speed component. This is the length of the vector. I'm just gonna rename this speed. And the other one, I need the direction, and to get that, you are using the normalize node or function in vex. Now, the reason this is called normalize is that the normal vector is accepted to be something which is 1 unit long. So if you imagine that you have a bunch of these different vectors, let me just draw. So this is the x and the y-axis again. If you can spare me the writing, okay, I'm gonna write x and y, and you have vectors which are this long, and now which is this long, and some of it is this long, and another one is like that, and you know you have these guys. So all of them, if we draw their arcs and project them on the x-axis, are gonna be having different length. So you see like this and this and this and this. So the normalize is saying, okay, let's have one vector which is the normal length. So let's say the normal length is 1, and let's say 1 is here. So if we just continue all of these guys in their direction like they are going, and we have that arc of the circle which is a radius of 1. So if we just continue all of these dudes, sorry mouse drawing, sorry. And if we just take the points where all these vectors continue, either them or their extensions, and you can see that all of them are going to be having the 1 length. So if we just turn all these vectors to these vectors that are crossing this line, they are going to all have the same length, and they are going to have the normal length of 1. That's why the operation is called normalize. And that's what it's giving you. It's giving you something basically which only has direction and has no length. The length is 1. It's not 0, it's 1, the normal length. So this is allowing us to break up this vector into one thing which is speed, which only has the length, because as we remember, arc these things down, and they only have one component. They only have x, the y is 0, so we measure how much the x is, and this is the length of the vector. And another component which is just the direction. So we can do things separately to the speed and to the direction without one affecting the other. Now, if I want to add some noise to that, some randomness to that speed, I can use a random. Okay, then I have to pick what I want to seed that random with. And I think ID will be cool because I want each particle separately to have a different random, and ID is something that the particle carries with itself. So accumulating things usually means that you multiply. I'm going to multiply the speed with that random, and then I will need to unify these things again because you can see I have velocity here at the end. I don't have the separate direction and the speed, so I need to bring them in again, and I can do multiply to do this again. Now the important part is that this guy is green, this guy is cyan. That's because this guy is a vector, the direction, and this guy is a float, which is like a single number. If I go back to the drawing here, you can see that all the lengths, which were all of these guys, right? That were my original vectors. So all of these lengths that are here, these are just single numbers. There is no y in here. These are all on x. So I can express them with just their x coordinate. And these are single number. So Houdini is telling me that these are single numbers because with the color of the boards and the lines, and also if you hover, you can see that the thing underneath the subscript is saying vector is float, the length is float, and here the thing is normal. Normal is just another way of saying vector, which is 3 numbers. So when I multiply, the result of the multiplication is going to be the result of what I plug in first. So because I want the whole thing to be a vector, the green thing is telling me that, I want to plug in the vector first. And now the product at the end is going to be the vector, which is the same thing that is in the first input variable. So if I do that, I'm going to see, okay, there is some randomness, but some of these guys are like very slow. And the reason for that is that I do not take into account that original speed. So, actually I did, I multiplied that original speed with the randomness. But now I have some which are very slow and I have some which are very fast. And how can I have a nice, like simple, useful, friendly control to have these guys to pick out basically how much of that I would have. So a good way to do this is using a mixed node. Not the only way, but an elegant way is to do that. So using a mix, I can say there is a bias here between 0 and 1, and I can mix between, let's say I want the randomness to be minimal, and this is the input 1, and then I want the randomness to be the most that there is, and there is input 2, and I can use this exact actually instead of what I had before. So then I can use that bias to pick how much randomness there's going to be. So if there is bias is 0, I'm going to have no randomness, and if bias is 1, I'm going to have like a lot of randomness. So this is basically mixing between a random speed multiplied by the random, which is always 0 to 1, which I multiply by that length here, which is allowing me to basically have the random in the range of the speed. So if I use a speed here, which is, let's say, 6, I have the maximum speed is that one, and the minimum speed is, a smaller one. If I don't do this multiplication, basically, if I don't get the random into that the range of the speed, let's say I do this, then I would lose the amount, the speed that I have picked out in here. the bias is basically just going to mix between something which is all the big speed and another speed which is kind of between 0 and 1 only. So because I don't want to do that, I will be, even if I have that that at 1, I'm still going to have something which is resemble the maximum speed, the original speed that I had, and having some that are much slower. Okay, so that's nice, but what about, you know, all these really slow ones? I can maybe just decrease the amount of noise, so I'm gonna have less. Okay, that's nice. Now another control which might be useful in here is to be able to say how many particles are getting which speeds. So if I say, okay, how many particles are getting the random speeds? Sometimes you want most of the particles to be very random and a few to not be, or the other way around. So unfortunately, that's also very easy to do. If I create a ramp parameter, which I can use to define these things, and choose a spline ramp, I can put this in the middle here after at random, and just label that as distribution. So if I go up and make this go to 1, that's going to be my linear distribution like this, and I can use the keys to pick out basically how many particles are going to be in which area. So here the white area is the amount of particles which are getting less variation, and the dark area is the particles which are getting more variation. So because the dark area here is less than the bright area, you can see that I have less particles that I have in the noise, the random speed. If I actually do the other thing, I will get more particles which are having the smaller random speed, and fewer particles which are getting the original, less randomized speed. That's cool when you want to have, a few outliers or stuff like that, interesting. Okay, so this would be my speed. Now, of course, you expose the parameters that you like. So this is the amount of randomness, and the ramp is already exposed. So when you go up in here, you already have all the controls that you need, and I'm gonna just drop this a bit so I can see a little bit better. Okay, so we got that. Next, we are gonna check out ways to control the bounciness. Now, I'm gonna drop the randomness and the speed just so I can see very clear. Now, what is defining the bounce? The points, now, if I go into their geometry, if I look for bounce, they do not have a bounce attribute, which means all of the bounciness is defined by that ground plane, the collision object. If you look into there, in physical, you see that there is a bounce of 0.5. This means that each bounce is going to eat up half of the energy of the particles, and their velocity is basically going to be halved. The speed, actually, is going to be half of what they got when they bounced. So now this is cool. If I drop this to 0.5, okay, I can maybe decrease the bounce. But what you can see there is that the particles do keep going on. So obviously we might want some drag to take care of that, and just turning that is gonna be affecting all the particles actually. So you see the original curve of what we had is changed, and I want to only affect the particles which are hitting. So let me enable this for only the particles that hit. So to do that, I need collision detect, was it? and it is letting me make a group which is containing all the particles that are hitting. So applying the drag to only that group is gonna slow things down a little bit. Let's see if we'll do this a little bit more air resistance. And see if I have a group. I don't really. I think this is for, that'd be nice to do when I have a specific object that I want to take collisions with, but if I just want to have any collisions, I can actually do this from the solver, from its collision behavior. So now let's see things. Okay, now we do have particles in the hit group, and sorry about slight mislead there. So now what we do is that we apply drag based on particles hitting, and they do stop after a while. It's useful to use outsleep, so the particles are going to be moved into a state where they would not be calculated, their collision, whatever. You can see that it's a bit difficult to control how far they go. If I do a lot of air resistance, then I will have very few bounces. Also don't really see how they collide. If I have less air resistance, so I can have more bounces, then they don't really stop. So what can I do? I can have more bounce, so they don't lose energy because of the bouncing, they only lose energy because of the drag. And then I can have more bounces, but still, if I look in here, they like forces get into an equilibrium state where eventually they just keep bouncing. So to get rid of that, I can actually make the particles bounce in a way that I can control. So if I do pop property, then in there you can see that there is something which is running a bounce attribute on all of the particles. So if I look at bounce now, you can see that I have an attribute, which means that I can then control bounce per particle, which is good. Well, it's something that sounds controllable. Now, what I really want to do is that after a few bounces, I want the particles to stop bouncing. So how can we do that? Let's grab again a pop-up. And inside, I will be writing into the bounce attribute. So this means I need a bind, which is going to be bounce. And because I want to modify an existing attribute, I am going to need another copy of that so I can read it and I can write into it. I don't think I'll need these guys. So there is an attribute called hit total, which is basically counting how many hits the particles have had, and this is getting automatically turned on when you go to the collision behavior and say add hit attributes. So we can use that to count our bounces. It was here. So let's then get another bind and bring this attribute in, the hit total. These are our total hits, our greatest hits, all of our hits are here. So we can get it to, we want to get the bounce eventually to a 0. So, you know, the bounce is between 0 and 1, which means that we have to normalize. And normalize, unfortunately, in the float, the number sense, means something which is a little bit different, but it's still quite close. So to the vector sense. If you go back in here, remember the vector sense made all of the vectors have their own direction, but one length. With the floats, it means that you get the float to be between 0 and 1. So let's go here to doing our drawing. So let's say you have that one single line, so no two axes in here because we're just discussing floats. Both the hit numbers and the hit count and the bounce are floats. One single number, which means it only lays on the 0 to x, on one single numeric line, one axis. So we have one number which is here, one is here, one is here, one is here. So let's say this is 15, this is like 2, okay, this is 0.5, then this is 1, then this is 2, then this is like 7 or 10. So normalization means that I'm going to take all of this range and I'm going to squash it down so it resides in here. So if a point was in the middle of that range, it's still going to be in the middle of that range. And when the point is at the end of that range, it's still going to be at the end of that range, but the range is going to be 1. So this guy is going to move to here, this guy is going to move to here, this guy is going to move to here. So they're going to keep their relative positions in the range, but they will, the length of the range is going to be squashed to 1. This is really useful because, you know, normalizing things to 1 lets us control them very handily. Now, to normalize that, I used fit range, so fitting the number of hits between 0 and 1, and I need to say what is the maximum of that range. So which is the range that I want to squash between 0 and 1. This is sounds like something that is good to have as a parameter. This would be my max hits, and I'll be able to control that. Let's say between 0 and 100, and the default will be 4 maybe. So after I have normalized that, then the next thing I want to do is to multiply it with the current bounce. So let's say multiply. I want to apply basically that to the bounce. Now there's not much difference how I order the inputs here because they are all of the same type. So let's see what we have. I want to see hit total and I want to see bounce. So bounce goes very quickly to 1. You see what we have there. We do not yet have a way to say that we want a lot of bounce when the hits are 0 and we want a little bounce when hits are a lot. Sounds like a ramp. So this would be the bounce over number of hits. Let's go to the interface, and I think we want a lot of bounce in the beginning when the hits are 0. So I will make this 1. And we want a little bounce at the end when the hits are few. That sounds legit, so let's see what we're gonna do. And that's basically what happens. So there is a lot of bounce at the start, then there is little bounce at the end. I can use that ramp to define how much bounce I'm gonna want in all of these different stages. So if I want the points to very quickly lose their bounciness, I can have a ramp like this. And again, this is over 4 hits. So their first hit is somewhere here, their second hit is somewhere here, their third hit is here. So this means that first and second hit have some bounce, then I have very little. If I want just to have the first hit, it will be like that. Okay. So from second hit, I have very little bounce. Now I can do more drag in here if I want to stop them. But the bounce is gonna be controlled from that place. And you can see if I ramp up that curve, I can see much more of the 4 hits that I have been putting here. If I say I want the points to make like 12 hits, then I can increase that and they're going to have much more, a bit smaller hits as they go. That drag is basically saying how much it is going to eat up of their velocity. So this is more hits. Okay. So this would be the bounce by hits number. And this is my guide. Documenting your setups is extremely important. So let me show velocity. Down of speed. Okay. And this is my. Let me show bounce. Cool. Now the thing which is not very likable in here is that every time that they bounce, all of them bounce off in the same direction. Not very great. So let's see if we can do something about that. You guessed it, I'm going to bring in another pop. And this is going to be very similar to what we did the first time for the velocity, because you know the bouncing off in a different direction just means that velocity is changing sometimes when it hits. So because it's when it hits, make these only work on the hit group. And here I have the velocity again, and this time I want to only affect the direction. You remember last time we only affected the speed? Now we only want to affect the direction. So to affect the direction, let's say I want, we want to break the velocity into direction and speed again. So we want normalized node, which gives us the direction. And we want a length node, which gives us the speed. And we multiply them, so we reconstruct them again for feeding them to the result velocity. Now I only want to affect the direction, so I'm going to open some space here. Now last time what I did was a random, so why not do it again? And this time, because I don't want each particle to have like the same randomness every time, I'm going to use that position. Position of the hit sounds like something that is appropriate here. But because I'm going to be adding this to a vector, I want 3D vector outputs. So now this is green, we're good. Then I can blend, mix, between that original direction and my new random direction. And I can use these things for directions, to change directions, and multiply back this with the length, and let's see what happens. So this is funny, but that's because the clamp position to integer, making things not that smooth. So there we go. Now we have, okay, we do have something, but you can see how they kind of go off in the same direction. Now this is because that random node is only making things between values between 0 and 1. So what happens when I apply this to a vector is that I'm going to draw again. So now I'm going to draw the 0 in the middle, because We don't have the directions just in this one quadrant. That's how usually it's called, like we draw before. Actually, there are directions all over the place. There are directions in all directions. So this is x is 0, and this is y, which is 1. I'm sorry. This is x, and this is y, and this is 1 on x and 1 on y. This is -1 on x, and this is -1 on y. So my random node is giving me a random vector, but it's only between 0 and 1. So all of the things point in here. So all the randomness that I'm going to be creating is only going to be applied in pushing things into the same direction. So that what I can do to fix that is I can use a fit node, and I can tell it to start with something which is between the 0 to 1 range, but end up with something which is in the -1 to 1 range. And because I do this for all of these components, the x and the y and z, I will make everything which was used to be in x only in this range to be also in this range, and the y, instead of just being this in this direction, to be in both of these directions, which means that now I'm going to have vectors that are just all over the place. So combinations between positive x and positive y are going to be here. Positive x and negative y are going to be here. Negative x and negative y are going to be here, and positive and negative x and positive y are going to be here. So looking at this again, you see that now they are going everywhere. Okay, which is nice. Trails of stuff which has 0 length, obviously a bit broken. So now I again want to promote that bias, which is going to let me say how much variation there would be. So this would be direction. Okay, bounce the direction random. So if I go up, and if I decrease this all the way to 0, I'm not going to have any variation. If I make this one, I'm going to have a bit more variation. And all that bounciness is controlled by my bounce by hit number. So it's okay, there's too many hits, let's make them fewer. And they will just bounce much less, just because their bounce will go to 0 much faster. And when it gets to 0, they will be spending all of their time in that hit group, and their speed is going to decrease very fast. And eventually they will fall underneath the sleep threshold, their velocity, and they are going to become red, which is good because the solver is not going to be occupied with them anymore, and they will not slow things down, of course. Okay. So it's kind of nice, but I want to again illustrate something with a large scale, large speed. And this is that. Not sure if I'm going to be able to see that here. Let me see if I can make it visualizable a bit better. Basically, this way I'm adding a little bit of velocity to the particles. There are situations in which you can see it very well. Here it's a bit more difficult. I think if I just turn off this drag a little bit, this might help. So let's see what is going to be happening now. Okay. Action. Let's just try drawing it. So basically what happens, well, the problem is that the random generator is going to give us things which are in the 0 to 1. So let me just draw another one. Again in this range. So let's say this is 1 on X, this is 1 on Y. So the random number generator is just creating some points, some numbers which are between 0 and 1 on the X and the Y. Some of them are going to be very high, almost 1 in both X and Y. Some of them are going to be very small, some are going to be in the middle. Now, if I imagine a vector which is somewhere here, let's draw the arc again between the X and the Y, the arc which has a radius of 1. You can obviously see that some of these numbers, though they fall into the 0 to 1 range that the random number generator is giving us, some of them are not going to be in the range here at all. Some of them will be outside. So using just these guys means that I will be either adding speed here or losing speed here. So pretty much only the ones that are there on the arc are going to not affect the speed. And I only want to affect the direction, right? So what I can do is to, again, just normalize them. Make all of these vectors just lay on this line with a normalized node. So I'll be here, and I'm going to say, after I have done the fit, I can just normalize. So when I do that, now everything is nice and proper, and you'll definitely be seeing a more consistent result. Lay this out. Sometimes good results, sometimes not that much. And yeah, okay. So this has given us the hit velocity direction. We can define with this guy. Okay. So let me see if there's something else for us remaining to do. I think that's basically it. So just to recap, we have the setup scene here. By the way, if you want to be able to use this over time, you don't really need to recreate all of these guys. So you just hit save preset, and you say, okay, this is random hit direction. So you save presets, and then you can just pick it from here. Or you can collapse it to a subnetwork and make an HDA, whichever, but you do get your interface and something that you can use without building it up all the time. So what we had is that we created some variation on the initial speed. We did some ways to set up to control the bounciness using a hit number and friction on hit. Again, that we can control using that, so say like how much they would bounce off. And we built a setup which is controlling the randomization of the direction after the particles bounce. You could also do a distribution in this setup. And I think that's basically it for today. So good stuff. Controlling your pops, very important, very useful. And see you next time.